Good evening to all of you, and welcome to our Boys to Men Foundation conversation on the hard road to success. Boys to Men Foundation is a Nigerian non-governmental organization established in November 2017 by Mrs. Ifeoma Idigbe. The foundation is dedicated to supporting boys and men to become their best selves and so to positively impact the communities in which they live. To do this, there must be fundamental changes to our way of thinking, being and doing, and a change in attitudes to gender roles. To quote Thomas Page McBee, we must, and I quote, create a culture where boys are not raised to see masculinity and humanity as mutually exclusive. We must raise the right kind of men to face the challenges of the new age and drive equity within the social structure. We don't want all our boys and men to fall behind and fall through the proverbial cracks. We want both males and females to thrive and excel, each gender making its own contributions to society. We must therefore support the development of a culture of excellence and promote confidence in both genders. This is the vision and mission of Boys to Men Foundation and our ultimate goal, that males become global leaders with integrity. Today our conversation is on the hard road to success. Real, lasting success requires hard work and is full of challenges. Warren Buffett had a hard time speaking in public and was crushed when he didn't get accepted to Harvard Business School. Today, he's an investment guru, founder of Berkshire Hathaway, and an authority on the economy, finance, and investments. Michael Bloomberg was a straight C student, only getting A's when he decided to go to grad school. Today, he is the founder of Bloomberg L.P, a financial information software and media company, the global leader in business and financial data, news, and insights. These men have names we recognize easily, successful men by any world standard. Their lives tell us that success is a journey with many challenges and failures. It is easy to glorify success when we see it, discounting the hard work, dedication, and time it has taken to achieve it. Achieving success is hard. It does not come overnight. We would now like to introduce our guest for this evening, Mr. Atedo N. Peterside CON. Atedo N. Peterside is an economist, investment banker, and entrepreneur. He is the founder and was the pioneer CEO of Stanbic IBTC Bank Plc, president and founder, ANAP Business Jets Limited, and ANAP Foundation. He obtained a BSc degree in economics from the City University London and a master's degree in science from the London School of Economics and Political Science. His executive education is broad and varied and includes the owner/president management program of the Harvard Business School. Mr. Peterside was chairman of Stanbic IBTC from 2014 until March 2017. He is currently the director of both the Standard Bank of South Africa Limited and Standard Bank Group Limited. He is the chairman of ArtX Collective Limited. He also serves on the African Advisory Board of the Prince's Trust International. He has served and still serves on private and public sector advisory boards and councils and committees and has been board director of Flour Mills Nigeria PLC, Nigerian Breweries PLC, Unilever, and Cadbury as chairman. He is the co-chairman of the steering committee of the 2021 to 2025 Development Plan and Vision 2050 for Nigeria. It is our real pleasure to have him as our guest this evening. Our host this evening to ask Mr. Peterside the hard questions is Mr. Oseloka Idigbe. Oseloka is a strategy consultant and coach and director, learning, professional development at Community Resource Exchange CRE in New York, where he leads diverse foundation, non-profit and governmental teams to solve organizational and sector-wide problems and assist them in areas such as strategic planning, risk management, and leadership development. He has held multiple positions, delivering strategic solutions to nonprofits, most recently at the Rockefeller Foundation's Digital Jobs Africa initiative, developing strategies for private sector engagement. He sits on the boards of some nonprofit organizations in New York. Oseloka has a master's in public administration from New York University, a Bachelor of Arts degree in philosophy from the University College London, and a Bachelor of Laws from BPP Law School London. He has professional certifications and accreditations. We would now like to hand over to Oseloka to start the conversation.
To the end. And then after that point, we will have the opportunity to answer any questions that you may have. So as we go through the conversation, please feel free to put your questions into the Q&A section so that I can access them easily. And once we wrap up our conversation, I'll definitely be able to start to get to those questions and really make sure that you are able to participate as much as you would like to as well. If there are questions that are in line with the flow of the conversation, I'll absolutely bring them in. So again, don't be too concerned about putting those questions in there. Just make sure that you get them in there as well. I noticed that folks also have access to the chat. So with the chat, if there are things that you want to share, you know, if you're in agreement with something, if you're finding something particularly interesting, hey, put that note in the chat. Happy to look at those comments and really have you engaged as part of this conversation. And so with that, I think I'll kick us off, you know. So Mr. Peterside, great to have you here. Before we get into all the sort of ins and outs about sort of starting off with the bank, the road to success, maybe let's just go back. Let's start from the beginning, right? And I'm wondering, you know, as you sit with us today and you think about where it all started, what were some of your interests growing up? What were some of the things that really interested you?
You know, I had broad and varied interests. I think by nature, from a very early age, I had a short attention span. So I was not somebody who was going to stick to one thing forever. So I was somebody who would do a bit of this, a bit of the other. And if I stayed on any one thing for too long, I got bored. You know, so I was somebody who liked variety. So, and that's what, and I think that quest for variety never stopped in terms of trying to broaden your knowledge across a broad spectrum of subjects.
That's fair enough. No, absolutely. So great to hear that. And I think that variety, as they say, is the spice of life. So I think that that's probably a good place to start. You know, and as we sort of move from that, I'm wondering, you know, what were some of your dreams, right? What are some of your hopes and dreams? As you sort of had that varied sort of interest set, what were some of the things that you hoped and dreamed as you sort of became a young man and you were starting to look towards the future?
You know, I'll tell you something. I was one of those people that had a problem knowing in school whether I was stronger in the arts or in the sciences. So I was probably just as good in maths as I was in history or as I was in geography or physics and so on. So it was not obvious what my narrow interest might be. So I actually went all the way to A-levels. I did maths, physics, chemistry. Somewhere along the line, I then decided, even before I finished the A-levels, that everybody in the class, in the maths, physics, chemistry class in King's College was applying for engineering. I looked myself in the mirror and said, hang on a second, you don't want to be an engineer. I mean, as a 17-year-old, my memory of engineers was German engineers wearing shorts, trying to do their cobri, and in the hot sun with Panama hats. And I told myself, no, I want something easier. I want to be in an office, a conditioned office. So I want to get out of this, you know, engineering mindset. So really what I then decided to do was that I wanted to go into the business, do more towards the business economy side. So when all my colleagues were applying to do engineering in the maths, physics, chemistry class, I started applying to read economics because I wanted to get out of that stream. So it was like I decided that for me, the real world was to try and be an entrepreneur, to get into business and so on.
I mean, I get that. Yeah, that actually sounds absolutely in line with when you started. You said, you know what, I had varied interests, right? And actually, as you described an engineer, it sounded like a very narrow definition. So of course, it actually seems about right that you actually thought, business, entrepreneurship, economics. There's a broad range of topics that I could really sort of thrive on inside that. Perfect. All right. And so as you sort of engaged in this sort of idea of being an entrepreneur, being involved in business, broadly speaking, how did you define success for yourself, right? So if we were saying, hey, I'm going to be an engineer, maybe success is I have become an engineer and I'm working as an engineer. But in this sort of more broad space, how did you define success for yourself initially?
Well, I think initially I having said that I would like to be an entrepreneur, I defined success initially as being able to have my own business and get that business to be successful. Now, success is something that people define differently. You can define it in terms of relativity, relative to other people, or you can define sometimes in the absolute. I think in real life, it's a mixture of the two. And also, before you can use the word success, you've got to be trying to achieve something that is a bit aspirational. I mean, you cannot just say that I woke up in the morning, so I'm successful. Yes, you woke up successfully, but I think when you talk about success, it is relative to some other yardsticks. So it assumes some forms of measurement, and it must be aspirational, something that was not necessarily obviously within your grasp, and you managed to get to it. But I think it's very important also that people focus on how they define success, because I think sometimes the mistake is made from the onset by defining success wrongly, or by failing to set the right goals. The right goals is number one, is key. And the example I will give in life, and I know that Nigeria, the audience is largely Nigerian. Nigerians, I'll use examples from two sports because Nigerians understand soccer, they understand the Olympic Games. When I talk about choosing what you want to do, think about the Olympic Games. There are thousands of athletes, but guess what? You decide what event you want to take part in. You've got a broad choice. Now, for some athletes, where they go wrong is that they chose the wrong event. The guy tried to be a sprinter, really should have been trying middle distance, but he never realized that. That's why you find that throughout history, that people who were in one activity, one end of a sport, and they move somewhere else, because it's difficult, it's not that obvious to know where you would attain the most success. You can assess your abilities, look at the progress you are making, but you've got to think in terms of what your own qualities are and where you think you've got the chance to succeed. And if you define that wrongly, you're in trouble from day one. Because some people look in the mirror, they lie to themselves, they start imagining they can do something they cannot do. Imagine if Usain Bolt was trying to be a pole vaulter. So you've got to understand that, so at least the first thing he knew was that he was a sprinter. And to even make it more complicated, because Olympic Games, you choose your sport. Let's take soccer. Even after you've chosen soccer, there are one of four areas you can concentrate on in a soccer team: goal, defense, midfield, or attack. There are people who spend their time as well trying to be a striker when they should have been defenders, or vice versa. In fact, if I went to school, like just one last comment on that. When I was in school in King's College, there was a guy called Ricky Manuel. I was in King's College. He was trying to play soccer. I came back. I went to Biafra. I was trapped there for 1 year. I came back exactly 1 year later. Ricky Manuel, who was trying to play soccer when I left KC for Biafra, when I came back a year later, he was the best goalkeeper in secondary school football in Lagos. So much so that the Green Eagles at the time called him in to be a reserve goalkeeper. He could have wasted his life trying to be a striker, trying to be a defender. Somewhere along the line, it was discovered that his strongest asset was goalkeeping. He had the reflexes, he had timing, he had all those qualities. So that just shows you that even within the same sport, you can choose wrongly and fail to maximize.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I definitely hear that, right? I think what I'm really getting from this is the idea of, yes, you know what? We want to be aspirational. We want to dream big. We also want to be reasonable with ourselves, right? And be realistic and really understand what it is that we are capable of, what it is that we can be good at. And when you say sort of defining success wrongly, right? And actually trying to find out what the right lane is, I'm wondering what is something that you think maybe some people can do to actually try and figure out what the right lane is, even within a given sport or a given career path?
No, the first one is that you've got to be able to assess your own strengths and weaknesses. And it sounds so simple, but I've seen people get it wrong time and time again. In You know, if you're going in for an activity for which you are not remotely endowed, or you don't have the attributes, it's going to be a long, hard struggle. And sometimes in Nigeria, parental influence does not help. I know too many friends of mine from, you know, much younger, when the parents decided you must be a doctor, you must be a lawyer, you must be this, you must be that. So all these parents forcing people to do things that were probably not their strongest areas. All that is, you know, it's a problem. You've got to be able to discover where you think you've got the sort of an advantage, comparative advantage, where you can compete. But let me just explain one thing, that is a complicated subject, and I'm going to borrow from a famous author, you know, Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers. The truth is that the activities you can excel in are defined by a number of things, sometimes beyond your control. A bit about your parentage, a bit about patronage, a bit about where you grew up, the community, what you're exposed to, what you have access to, and all that. So, I mean, if you were, let's just imagine that you would have been very good at skiing. But if you grew up in the tropics, forget it. You will never go near a ski slope. So it's also, so there's an extent to which we did not choose how we came into this world or in which community we came up. But I think that the whole idea is that wherever you came from, wherever you are, you can try and find some activity where you can be competitive and try and understand your strengths and weaknesses and shy away from those things that you know are a struggle for you.
Right. And so as I'm hearing that, I'm really hearing, listen to those things that sing to you, the talents that you may actually have, right? And actually try to really delve into them and follow that path, as opposed to saying, I wish I was good at this thing, right? And then directing your interest to that area instead. And so I'm also hearing from you that there is something around your surroundings, the environment in which you grew up, that also can help you promote you to think about the different types of things that you might be good at, right? So you use that skiing example versus coming up in the tropics itself. I think it's an interesting segue for us, right? You talked about Malcolm Gladwell, right? And I wonder, as you sort of were coming into life, and I'm wondering, you know, what were some of your biggest influences? Maybe what and maybe who were some of your biggest influences as you sort of started out on your career path?
You know, that's a difficult one, but I think I have to start with family. I'm from a small, you know, immediate family. I never had a brother in this world, so no brother could have influenced me. So my two sisters influenced me from day one because I was the youngest. So I grew up trying to aspire to do things that they were already doing. So the influence came from my sisters and from my parents, you know, mother and father. Mother, interestingly, both parents influenced me, but in different ways. My mother, I think, gave me confidence, gave me belief, made me believe in myself. My father helped me to understand the risks, you know, and the things to worry about in life, to avoid being, you know, taken for a ride, you know, or being, getting into trouble and all that stuff. So it's like he was a more risk averse, and that was the impact he had on me in terms of almost like an early age risk management, you know. But meanwhile, my mother, on the other hand, was about confidence building. So people who know me say, I've always appeared very confident.
Yeah, that's I think family, right? Sounds like actually all the different members of your family have really sort of influenced the way you think about this. And I think, especially for an entrepreneur, right? I think those two pieces that you mentioned from your mother and your father, so the confidence, right? And the ability to assess risk. Those two pieces really come really, really well nicely together when we think about actually stepping into the unknown, starting your own business, as you said, and also sort of being an entrepreneur.
Yeah, but probably let me just jump in and talk also, but all that was up to about age 10. Yes, but it's important. Foundation is important. Early influences. I think thereafter, it moved slowly from family into institutions. So when people, I remember some years ago, I was in Harvard Business School doing owner-president management program. I was already MD of IBTC then, and somebody came and said, "Oh, this guy he has been influenced he has been influenced or helped by Harvard Business School. I had to correct them immediately. My formative years were in King's College, Lagos. So let me make that clear, because from about age 10 to about 17, those were the formative years. In fact, I'm one of those people who believe that the universities and so on you go to later are important, but the foundation is secondary school. It's the foundation. In any case, what do universities do? Some people say, try and be cynical, but what they do is that they take the best universities, take the brightest and best students who are going to succeed anyway, and then they claim them. So, but somebody made those students the best and brightest, or made them good students. And typically that was secondary school. Right. Yeah, so for me, the formative years were in King's College, not primary school. Because I entered King's College at age 10, I was the youngest boy in the entire school. That was a coincidence. So I was struggling to keep pace with boys who were all older than me in everything I was doing. So it helped me to be competitive because I was disadvantaged. I was the youngest. So everything I had to do was to compete with boys who were older than me. By the way, I hope that you guys are aware that all this talk about boys to men is not very sort of politically correct, because I had so many lady friends complaining bitterly that this discussion had better be broadened to include women.
I mean, I think the idea here, right, is that that's the focus, right? That's the focus. We suspect that there are a lot of different opportunities, right, that we want to sort of try to provide for boys to actually realize that actually there are different ways to go about this. But I definitely hear the point. Well taken. And so as I'm hearing this, right, I'm really understanding that up until the age of 10, right, you got a lot of that confidence from your family, right? Confidence from your mother, risk management, risk assessment from your father. Going into school, right, where these are really the formative years, of course, those are probably extremely helpful. But of course, you also mentioned being the youngest, you really felt like you had to strive for greatness within that environment. So just really appreciating those pieces that really formed you. And then I think I like that perspective you shared about university being, hey, they've already picked the ones who already were doing well, right? And so should not be taking all the credit, where the formative years are really, really important for us. So I'm really hearing that. That's something I'm really taking away there. And so as we move forward in the conversation, I'm wondering, we've talked about a whole bunch of things now. We talked about the range of things that you might have been interested in, studying, sort of thinking about economics, right? Thinking about being an entrepreneur. So how did you actually narrow down, right? When you said, hey, you know what? I'm going to set up a financial institution. How did you actually come to that decision?
Okay, I think we are jumping ahead a little. First thing I decided to do was, where was I going to work? Knew that it would have been impossible to leave university at age 21, 22. I mean, it's done in some cases, but would have been almost impossible to leap from there. No experience of anything. I was coming back to Nigeria from the UK, and then to leap into business. So the first thing I was doing was deciding which sector I was interested in, and I knew it was investment banking, and I got into banking. In fact, initially my youth NYSC I was sent to First Bank, because there was no investment bank then or merchant bank then that was registered with NYSC. There were merchant banks, but they were not registered with NYSC. Halfway through my NYSC with First Bank was when I was introduced to Now Merchant Bank, which was the oldest merchant bank in the country. They decided to register for NYSC and then apply to have me move over and join them. So I was the first youth corper in Now Merchant Bank. But now that's the part of my CV that everybody forgets. I worked for 10 years, investment banker. And I can explain to you why 10 and not 9 or 8 and not 11 or 12. But I worked for 10 full years as an investment banker. I was an employee first. So sometimes you've got to learn a trade. So I was an employee first. I mean, I rose up to the rank of AGM, acting general manager, before I left to form IBTC.
So what would you say was most important about that 10-year period? right? Where you were really learning that trade? What was most important that you took away from that actually allowed you to have the foundations?
Yes, again, I will go back to Malcolm Gladwell and Outliers, when he tries to explain that if you pick any activity, you've got to put in so many hours day to day before you actually become an expert. So I think those 10 years were when I put in, he talks about putting in 10,000 hours. It was in those 10 years that I put in 10,000 hours. And I thought I really understood banking, investment banking. I knew what to do. I felt I knew what to do, what not to do, and all that. So it's not true that I stumbled to form IBTC with no experience. In fact, if anything, I remember the late CEO of now Merchant Bank, Oluwale Adeosun, when he passed on a few years ago, and I did a tribute, family had to do a tribute. I made it clear that he was a phenomenal influence in my career, in the sense of taking me out from a very early age, promoting me and giving me lots of responsibility beyond my years. So all that was part of the grounding because he had confidence in me.
Perfect. I think that's really, really important. I think especially in today's world, right, where we can be looking at social media, we can be looking at Instagram, we can be looking at success, right? The image of success, but actually we don't see behind that, right? The veil, the hard work that actually goes into that. So I'm actually really saying that success is not something that is instant, and actually success comes with experience as well. So there are responsibilities you have to have in that 10-year period, increasing responsibilities over the time. You have to be grounded in that. And also I think something that I guess is implied from what I'm hearing from you is this idea of discipline. Right? So it's not just a matter of just jumping up and down, jumping around. It's actually saying, hey, I've put in the 10 years and now I feel very, very ready to move forward.
Yeah, but let me confess that there was a reason for the 10 years.
Okay.
If I had my way, I would have tried to jump out after 8 years. But guess what? It had to be 10 years because at the time, the Central Bank of Nigeria made it clear that for you to qualify to be a bank CEO, you must have 10 years of working experience. So since I was going to apply to form IBTC and to be founding CEO and the largest shareholder, they were only going to accept me if I had 10 years working experience. So, and that's why as soon as I had 10 years, within a few months, I had left to begin IBTC. So perhaps if they allowed me after 8, I might have tried it at 8 or 7. But once I got to 10, I was not going to wait for 11 or 12.
Right.
I felt I was ready already. Yeah. Now that's interesting because we began IBTC, I was 33. And I just finished telling you that I felt I was ready. What would have given me a right at 33 to think I was ready? Because I'd done 10 solid years of investment banking. So about 8 or so, I felt I was ready. So I was not afraid of the competition. I was not afraid to go out there and try. So it's that feeling that you have done your privilege, you've done your grounding. So I felt I was ready. But the one thing I will mention, though, that will surprise you is that although I was 33 and it was not the policy of the bank, you may not be aware that when I started IBTC at 33, every single person that worked in the bank was younger than me. So that at 33, I was the oldest person in the bank. Now, it wasn't because there was a policy against hiring older people. But let me ask you a question. If you're 55 years old and you hear that the kid of 33 was beginning the bank, you're 55 and you work for a solid bank like Union Bank or First Bank, are you going to resign your job and go and risk your career working under that kid? So all that happened was that the young ones voted with their feet. They were the only ones who had confidence in the 33-year-old. So it was much later when the bank became successful that older people now accepted that this was a serious institution to apply to. So it was so I had no choice. I had to pick from the brightest and best young people I could find, men and women.
I mean, that is a very powerful statement, right? And actually, I think some of that actually speaks to the level of belief, right, that you had in what you were trying to do, what you were trying to achieve. It actually says, yes, you know what? My 10 years, I have got the experience that I need, and whether or not the older folks are backing me, I'm ready to do this. So I think I definitely take a lot of inspiration from that, absolutely. And so as you sort of were in that mode of, hey, we're starting the bank now, what are some of the key considerations as you began this journey? What was it that really underpinned the values of this institution that you wanted to start?
I think those values were homegrown. In fact, I was asked that question recently when I went to speak at a business school, and because IBTC had core values. We were not going to cut corners. It was about integrity. We wanted to behave properly. We wanted to do the right thing because we wanted to build a solid institution. We were not into, listen, I've explained this to people many times that if all you do is that you break all the rules and you make some money, you don't have a business. You only have a business when you play it by the rules and the market responds in your favor and you have clientele who believe in you, your product, and your brand. So we were all about building a brand from day one and doing the correct thing. We're not interested in trying to cut corners and all that because you don't have any business unless you have brand loyalty. And if I'm to leap forward many more years, later on, we also had subsidiaries, the stockbroking business, then much later, pensions. Pensions is a very good example. Stanbic IBTC pension managers, within the short time, was the biggest by far in the country. Guess what? You know what the law says? Every Nigerian gets to choose who they want to manage their pensions. So which means that it was individual Nigerians choosing that I want my pension managed by IBTC. So we have to behave in a way to give people confidence. And when they make that choice, they chose IBTC. Then you have your business because people have made a choice, not because you bribed them or because you rigged something, but because they saw what they liked and they chose you voluntarily.
Yeah, so I think that's really, really important. I think that as a lot of people probably think that, hey, what I want to do when I start my business is I want to be successful. I want to make money. That's how we're thinking about it, right? And so a lot of short-term thinking might be happening as a result of that. What I'm hearing from you is this idea of integrity. So if we are actually grounded in the value of integrity, what that actually leads to is brand loyalty, brand recognition. And because of that, you can actually have a long-term sustainable success, right? Because of that level of belief.
Or I put it differently, before our time, the older generation, many people complained and said, oh, the grandfathers had businesses, but the business died with them and they couldn't hand it over to their children. Let's be fair to those children. Most times, those things were not businesses. You see, an arrangement that is based on the fact that you got an import license because the minister was your friend, and so he denied orders and gave it to you, he made some money. You cannot hand that over to your children and grandchildren. Conversely, if you have a business where you have a brand, there's brand loyalty, you've built it up to a point, your market share is 25%, 30%, you can hand that over to other people because they've got something to maintain and build on.
Right.
You see, we in Nigeria, we often confuse people making money to think that therefore they have a business. You can make money, but you really don't have a business. Sometimes all you have is a racket.
Right.
You're sort of racketeering. And those things are very difficult to hand over.
Yeah, no, that's a powerful point. Very, very, very powerful point, especially within the context of where we are. So that's really important. And I think, as we sort of think about this idea of integrity and the long-term sustainability, and those are the things that you really founded Stanbic on. I'm wondering, as you went into that, what are some of the challenges that you faced along the way, right? So what were some of the challenges in terms of maybe some of the things that you anticipated and maybe some of the things that were surprises? So maybe we start with the things that you could have anticipated. What were some of those?
Look, I knew that at 33, we're going to have a serious problem. Many people will have a problem taking a 33-year-old seriously, especially when all his colleagues were even younger than him. As an extent to which some people would feel that, look, banking is serious business. It's not for kids. So you had to overcome that. That was the challenge that you knew up front because you know your age and you know you're the youngest person out there, the youngest bank CEO in the country. So you have to find a way around that. And one of the things we did from the beginning was to have some older people on the board as NEDs. So you see that when IBTC started, there were 3 young directors. I was the MD. Then there was Wale Edu, who was an ED. Then there was Ahmed Dasuki, who was slightly younger than me, who was an NED. But the other 3 people we chose to come onto the board as part-time directors were all people who were much older, because you wanted to counterbalance. This is why I said you must look in the mirror, know your weakness, and try and find ways to augment them. So we brought in older people to be on the board alongside. So it's almost like saying that if youth is your handicap, then have some older people beside you. So people look at those names and they think, well, these are not just kids alone. There's some older people, who believe in them. So our first one was Chief Philip Asiodu. Then he had to leave because CBN changed some rules. Then the next chairman was David Dankaro. These are people who were, at the time, almost double my age, David Dankaro. But that was great. That's why I said, ideally, it's because sometimes people come to me and they say, oh, I have this business and I want to choose partners. I choose people who are all like me. And I said, hang on a second. Why don't you choose people who have strengths or skill sets that will complement your weaknesses, that can make up for your weaknesses? So what we were thinking was choosing some elderly people to make up for our own obvious weaknesses, because what we had against us was age.
Right, and that was accepted. You actually recognized it and said, okay.
Another problem that I faced at that time, being a Nigerian, was, it got to a point when people could just about accept you as a bank CEO at 33. Then guess what? So you were running for almost every meeting yourself because everybody was younger than you, and so you got in there. Then I remember one day, a few years later, we had 2 very important meetings. One was in, let's say, in Lagos Island. The other one was on the mainland, Ikeja, and both had to take place at the exact same time. So I had to choose which one to attend and which one to delegate and send some people to represent you. Because initially they'll get to accept you. The next struggle is to get them to accept your management team. And I remember sending some 2 young ladies to represent us at the other meeting. And when they walked in there, apparently the clients were livid. They felt insulted. They said that two small girls came to represent IBTC, that we didn't take them seriously. But eventually they calmed down and allowed listen to those girls and everything. So much later, the guy called me and I apologized. I told him there was a problem. I couldn't make both. And guess what? After all the apologies and everything, he told me that, it's a good thing we listened to those two small girls, because at the end of the day, we had to admit that they were brilliant.
Yes.
You see, Nigeria then, and probably still now, was male chauvinist. So imagine sending 2 young women to go and represent you somewhere. There was a temptation not to listen to them at all. Then they thought, okay, let's just bring them in, let them talk, and we dismiss them. And when those girls finished talking, they were converted.
Right.
The audience converted.
Well, that is powerful.
Something as well about prejudice.
Yeah, that is powerful, right? So I mean, the gender dynamics also at play, as well as the age dynamics, right? And I think, that's really, really important. And I think, it sounds like actually you built your team, right, without those biases, actually, which is actually something else that we can actually really be learning from as we move forward, right? So not having those biases and actually really honoring people based on their skill set and what it is that they're bringing to the table as you build that team.
Let me tell you, that one was common sense. If you're 33 years old and you're young and people who are elderly don't work for you and you want to be competitive, let me ask you a question. If you want to be competitive in a service sector activity like that, can you really do anything except hire the best people that you can find?
Absolutely not.
No
Absolutely not. Yeah.
As you can see in this example, even when I sent the best people that I could find, there was a problem.
Yeah.
So can you imagine if I sent 2 young people who didn't have anything up here?
And that would be, and then we probably would not be having this conversation right now, So there's something that I'm interested in digging into here. You mentioned that you actually really use that strategy of understanding, hey, you know what? These are the gaps that I need to compensate for. right? And as you sort of thought about that, you said, hey, I really need to get some senior folks to come in and really build our clout, build our credibility, especially amongst those who are doubting the credence of younger people. How did you convince those people? How did you convince those people to be part of Stanbic?
I'll tell you the honest truth. It was IBTC then, but I'll tell you the honest truth. It was relatively easy partly because, like I told you, I had worked for 10 years. I remember one of them when I approached him to be a shareholder in IBTC. We finished talking, doing all the presentations, blah, blah, blah. At the end of the discussion, see, because he knew me already. I'd been doing this. I was an investment banker. We had been helping him with transactions, doing deals for the last 8-7 years. So at the end of my whole presentation, I now paused for him to ask me questions. And I was prepared for the most difficult question. You know what he told me? He said, young man, your reputation precedes you.
Hey, yeah.
We have confidence in you and I'm going to invest. The other one that will surprise you, and I said it when my father passed on in 2016. See, my father was a shareholder in IBTC, bought some shares, not because, he thought I was taking some wild risk, but his only reason for making an investment there was because he knew that I was approaching other people to make an investment. And he thought it was important that he also made an investment to show confidence in his son. That was his reason. Now, fast forward many years, it turned out that was his best investment ever. So he invested not for the return, but because he thought he had to be seen to invest in the business that his son was starting. So it was parental loyalty.
Yeah, that's really amazing to hear. And I think, something I'm really taking away there is going back to that 10 years, right? That 10 years prepared you for the world, but that 10 years also told the world about you. So that reputation was also built in that 10 years. So I really, really appreciate you sharing that. And so as we sort of talk about some of those expected challenges, we talked about some of those, about age, gender dynamics, all those different types of pieces. What are some of the surprises? What are some of the surprise challenges that hit you all along the way as you were going there?
I never knew. I had worked in a bank for 10 years. I dealt with authorities and so on, but I never realized that managing the regulator in Nigeria managing your regulators was going to be almost a full-time job. So there was a surprise there, and initially you thought it was temporary. But over the years, it became, every bank knows now that, if like any regulated business, managing your regulator is part of the business. So as a CEO, you have to divide your time between looking for business and managing your regulators. So that was initially, it was a bit of a surprise, but then one got used to it because as soon as you realize it's what you've got to do. By nature, I'm not somebody who cries over spilled milk. As soon as you show me that this is the reality, and please don't get me wrong, when I say managing your regulator, all we were doing was making sure that everything we did was transparent and straightforward, and so we could explain it to our regulators, even when they didn't fully understand it or they thought it was wrong. We were not in the business of waking up in the morning to break all the rules. I can go as far as saying that the business philosophy was that we are trying to be compliant. So if we broke any rule, it was a mistake. Now, I know that later on, there were a few banks that, people woke up in the morning and sent out their staff to go and break some rules and so on. But that was not part of our core values. Our culture was different.
Yeah, and I think that you've just named it exactly. That goes back to earlier what we were saying about integrity, right? So if we're starting from that point of integrity, it actually allows us to be transparent, right? And actually grapple with those challenges that we might be facing along the way.
Yeah, but let me tell you something else as well, because they say some things go together. You see, if you're trying to have a merit-driven society, and I said earlier, you hire the best people that you can find. Even when there was some confusion, and some of those young kids who were the best you can find, you hire them for their brains. Some of them started arguing, that we think we have to be allowed to pay brokerage or pay a bribe and this and that. Other banks are doing that. I said, hang on a second. Let's get one thing straight. If we wanted to be going to the business of paying bribes and doing deals and being dishonest, then I would never have hired you.
Right.
I would have hired a good young crook. Why do you want to hire somebody? Yes, because there are different skills involved. I would have hired a different kind of human being.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it was simple. You were hired because of who you are, what you are, your brains, and how you can add value. So focus on that.
Right.
Don't tell me we should go and do something else. If I wanted to go down that route, I would have gone to some shady place in Lagos to hire some crooks and brought them in with dark glasses and said, okay, you guys go out with bags of money every day to go and bring us business.
Right. And
So
that thing that
the whole team understood.
Yeah,
We're,
and it's
we're trying to build brand loyalty.
Yeah, and it goes back to what you were saying, right? About, hey, staying in that lane of, hey, this is where I can be successful, right? So actually, instead of trying to do the different things that actually weren't part of the original plan for the business. So I really appreciating that. So I'm wondering, Mr. Peterside, you've talked about a couple of those challenges, right? Regulators, talked about the challenges, of course, with the age and all those different types of pieces. Was there any point where you felt, wow, there's a challenge, it's facing me right now, and this is insurmountable. I feel like giving up in this moment.
There'd be some rough times, but again, they were linked. Some years ago, I was speaking at an event and I said, in Nigeria, to succeed in business, you've got to have all the usual qualities. Then I mentioned one other quality that you need in Nigeria, which you don't need in many other countries. And guess what that was? I said, in Nigeria, for you to be successful in some businesses, you, the entrepreneur, you almost have to be a combative personality. Mm-hmm. Now, that's unfair, but that's the reality. Because there are people that will come out and try you, turn things upside down. They're almost daring you. They want to bully you. Mm-hmm. So unless you show them that, hey, I may be young, but you cannot run over me. You have to show them that you are young. Even though you are young, you are tough. People need to see that you're a bit of a fighter. If they see that you're timid, no matter how clever you are, you're timid, you cannot look them in the eye, they can come and bully you and you start begging them, offering them money and so on. They will bully you left, right, and center. Right. So it's hard because it should not be that one of the qualities for succeeding in some businesses in a country should be that the entrepreneur must be combative. But that's the reality of where we are. And I think over the years, it got worse. So I feel really sorry for young people today because they have to fight for everything, including for their rights.
Yeah. And so I think, as we go into the lion's den, whichever of the lion's dens it is, right, it is about being brave and holding your own, right, and really making sure that that is communicated to the other people in the room. I think what you said about not allowing people to walk all over you is something that's very, very important here as well. Thank you. That's a really, really different perspective, and I really appreciate that. And it's actually just the honest truth, right? It's the honest truth. So as we move forward, and we talked about some of the challenges here, and I'm wondering, how do we get to success, right? And so the question I have is, how did you actually know? How did you know when you said, hey, you sat down with the rest of the team and you looked around and you thought, you know what? I think we've done it. I think we've reached success here.
No, I think in every activity, there's the saying that if you cannot measure it, you cannot manage it. Whatever you're doing, you've got to be able to measure it. Let's go back to soccer. Let's go back. How do strikers measure themselves? How many goals do they score? Goalkeepers, how many saves do they make? Because you have to be able to measure it. So we had things that we could measure. I can tell you for a fact that in less than our first 10 years, IBTC was the investment bank that had the highest profits in the marketplace by far. So there were things you could measure in terms of within our first 9 years, we had been chosen by Euromoney as the best investment bank in Nigeria. But put that aside because you have your own metrics to see how you're making progress. It's about market share. You can measure your market share. I mentioned that we went into stockbroking later. Stockbroking is an activity where you can calculate your market share to 2 decimal places. All the transactions done by the whole of all the stockbrokers in Nigeria. Our market share within a few years of being in the business, we had the largest market share. And the figures are published by the stock exchange. In pensions, it's the same thing. We had the largest market share. So those figures are scientific, because you know how much money in total exists in the pension pot. And if PenCom tells you the total is 10 trillion and your share is 3 trillion, then you know you've got 30%. Yeah. And so that luckily we're in the business where numbers were available and numbers mattered.
Right.
But even then, you see, when I said you can measure everything, I bet you that the lady who sells, the most successful person in selling pepper in the market in Idigbe, in Ibadan, will know that she's the most successful one, because it's about clientele. And how she's building up her business in vis-a-vis others that are selling the same product. So the people who are generally doing an activity, including sportsmen, they measure their progress all the time. That's what lets you know when you're slacking, when you've got to buck up. And also it helps your team when you can measure, because you can show them the data and they can see. So even a sprinter can in heat, time himself and know whether it's getting better or getting worse. You need that. You have to measure.
Right. And I'm really hearing this idea of measurement, right? And I think deeper than that, what I'm also getting here is this idea of identifying those key indicators, e.g. the market share, right?
Yes.
E.g. the time, right? So identifying those key indicators so that when you actually achieve that, it is something you can be aligned with your team and communicate. This looks like we now have 50% market share. That means that by definition, we are successful, right? The numbers don't lie.
Yes. And also, let's be careful, because I don't want people to think that the only way to measure success is that it must be number one in an activity. By definition, everybody cannot be number one. I mean, for instance, I never had an ambition of, let me try and become sort of richest man in Africa or in the world. I was never in that business in terms of values and what you were looking for, because I always understood that all that I thought I ever needed was to be independent financially, to be secure financially. And thereafter, I wanted to spend my time doing other things. There are more things to life than just trying to amass money.
Yes, right. And I think, if I may, right, also when I think about the success, I mean, if I'm implying something based on the conversation we've had here, is holding on to that integrity that underpinned the way you started the institution, right? So that also looks like success.
Sure, that's why I said you can measure in a variety of ways, and you have to make sure you run your own race. Because, like I explained earlier, the person looking successful may just be somebody who is benefiting from rigging something. At the end of the day, I mean, some say all is fair in war and all that stuff, but I think it's about the values you have. I was never interested in going somewhere, paying people to manipulate all the rules, rig, stop other people from getting their fair share and diverting everything to me. And then I go home thinking I'm successful. I think I've failed. So when I said we were number one in stockbroking, all we did was go out and compete fairly.
Right.
We didn't influence the regulator or anything. When I said we were number one in pensions, it was by competing fairly. See, think about it. If you are Usain Bolt, do you really want to win 100 meters because some official rigged it for you? Is that how you measure success?
A feeling that you will have, yeah.
Or what is that? It is false yourself. So the point I'm making is that if you're a tennis player, do you really want a situation where the only way you can win Wimbledon is if the officials rig for you?
Yeah. And so thinking of that, right? Thinking of like holding on to that thing about that feeling, right? What did it feel like, right? Can you remember a feeling that you had that was really great when you really felt, wow, we're successful? Like, is there some moment that you really remember feeling something really wonderful, really great?
To be honest with you, I never sat down and started thinking about such things. All I can tell you is that At the end of our first year, we were very lucky for a variety of reasons. At the end of our first year, we turned profitable, IBTC.
Right.
At the end of the first year, we turned profitable. We broke even and made a profit in the first year. In fact, nowadays, when I talk to many young people, I keep on telling them that please remember, ultimately, how you define success. Some people define success like they just raised some money or they borrowed some money. I said, look, we had to raise some money to start anyway. But beyond raising money, you've got to do something.
Mm.
Raising money just means you brought in investors. What return are you giving those investors? Until you can give them the kind of return that encourage them to have confidence in you, can you really say that you have achieved anything for them?
Mm.
For me, pleasure or satisfaction came from IBTC shareholders jumping for joy when they got their dividend.
That is fair enough. Yeah, that is fantastic. Delivering on the promise, right? Delivering on that promise.
Yes.
Amazing.
But some people had confidence in you from a very young age. They put money in your business and you wanted to make sure that they got a very good return.
Mm. Perfect. Right. Awesome. So thank you for sharing that, right? Especially after that 1 year, right? So I can actually even imagine, right, that calendar year, that ending, and actually saying, wow, we've actually turned a profit right now. And so if I would fast forward a little bit now and really start to think about the winding down, right? So how did you actually know when it was time for you personally to step away from your role heading up the bank?
You know, the truth is that I wanted, if I had my way, I would have stopped being CEO when I turned 50. If I had my way, which means I would have been CEO for almost 17 years, and I would have stepped down and allowed my team to take over, and I would have moved on. Well, guess what? Just when it was getting to be, when I was just about to turn 50, or just before I turned 50, was when central bank came up with this whole new requirement for banks to recapitalize, raise 25 billion. So they basically destroyed my whole retirement, my early retirement plans. My plan would stop being MD, become the chairman or something, allow my deputy to take over and move on to do other more interesting things, you know. So because of that, we had to go in, we acquired two retail banks, you know, raise some money. Then there was the moral obligation. If we raise some more equity from those who had confidence in us and we had complied with the 25 billion and all that, could you really ask people to bring money into your business today and they bring in the money and the next month you tell them, guess what, guys, I'm leaving? It was a breach of trust. Okay. So it's important. So I had to stay in there for at least 2 more years or a bit more for everybody to see that new money they brought in was safe. They were getting a good return. They were happy. Dividends were flowing. The bank was doing well. And that's the right time to go. You know, and we were always going to try and, I was always going to try and exit via a merger. So we finished up with the merger with Stanbic, and then it became Stanbic IBTC. And as soon as we finished that merger with Stanbic IBTC, I mean, Stanbic knew that I was not prepared to stay for 1 extra day as the CEO. You know, as things turned out, just a little historical note. As things turned out, I had packed my bags, I was ready to go. Then I got a phone call from the CEO in South Africa, and he told me that, he knows I'm supposed to leave next week, but that there's a problem. The person they earmarked to come in as the CEO, you know, had left the group. So they needed me to stay for 1 extra month or so to give them some time to make another arrangement. You know, that 1 month was the longest month in my life because psychologically I had gone.
Yeah.
And when I now had to stay for 1 month extra, that was the longest month in my life. You know, but luckily I survived that month. And then we had the board meeting, and the same day that I stepped down as CEO, I became chairman of the bank, which was fine. That was not a full-time job. So I was free.
Yeah.
Free.
It's very interesting.
Let me also explain, because in Nigeria, everybody was asking me, why do you want to leave so early? You have been CEO. I said, I've been CEO for 18 years. They said, hey, and so you're still young. You know, the following week, I remember, I went to London the following week. I picked up Financial Times. The headline on the front page was a story that said, the longest serving CEO in the FTSE, that is the top 100, FTSE companies, was the CEO of Tesco. And they're saying he has done 14 whole years and he's finally retired. So 14 was deemed to be phenomenally long. I had done 18,
yeah.
and they were asking me, why do you want to leave? Yes, so that was it.
I think that is so interesting. And I think that it's really, there's a theme that I'm seeing here, which is actually, there's a lot of self-assurance that you have displayed, right? As part of this conversation saying, I know when I'm ready to move on, right? So when you talked about being at the bank for 10, you said, you know what, I was ready at 8, but I held on for the other 2 because of that requirement. And then in this situation, you said, you know what, I was ready to step away at 17, but then I wanted to make sure because of that requirement that I stayed that other year, right? So I'm really understanding that level of self-assurance. Yeah.
Simple. Christians say man proposes, God disposes. So just because I plan to live at 50, doesn't mean that at 50, even if the heavens are falling, I must walk out. So I had to stay for 2 more years to 52 before I could walk out easily. But of course, you don't go walking out unless you have a solid team behind you.
Right.
So when I said I was ready to leave at 50, my deputy was ready to run the bank. You talk about succession planning.
Yeah.
You don't just abandon ship with no arrangements. Yeah, I mean, the team was ready.
Yes. And right. So again, building an institution, as you said earlier, that can be handed over, right? And that is really, really important. I'm really seeing that right now. And I'm wondering, as we sort of move towards the end of our conversation here, what are some of the most important lessons that you feel that you've learned along the way, right?
Most important lesson. Let me give you one. I told you that I was 33. Everybody was younger than me. Hey, I don't want to name names. We have people today walking around. They rose to become ED. Some of them joined IBTC when they were 20. I mean, 20. Yeah, when they were 20. So the most important lesson I learned was never underestimate young Nigerians. You see, all those kids, we chose them because generally they were smart, they were brilliant, but you still had to put them in a structure and put discipline in place and make rules and regulations. That's how you bring out the best in them. If you just gather young, bright people and you leave them to start fighting each other and, no discipline, it will fall apart. So you need 2 things generally in life. You need the right people and the right structure. Mm-hmm. You can add also the right environment, but it's the same thing as the right structure. So we had a structure under which young people could join and excel. You have to have that structure in place. We had the systems in place. In any case, even some of them who were bright but didn't want to subject themselves to the discipline, they soon found that they had no choice. They gave me all kinds of nicknames because they thought the environment was harsh, it was brutal, there was too much discipline. But guess what? Almost all of them, 15 years down the road, when they see me outside or when they're talking, they now tell me that now that they are leaders, they are doing the exact same things to the younger ones, beneath them. Young people everywhere need to be guided. They need to be, they need role models. If they have ability, you've got to nurture it.
Yeah, and so that investment, right?
And in any case, let me say one other thing. If all the younger people under you don't succeed, then it's because you are a failure. Right. You are the failure, not them.
And so one of the big lessons is, right, you mentioned the right people and the right structure. And I'm hearing something sort of over this is investment in the people, like really investing. Yeah.
Look, at the end of the day, if you talk about running a place based on merit, then it's about the right people in the right system and making sure that they produce all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. So as we sort of, again, continue this, I'm wondering, what are you most proud of? We've talked about the journey from the beginning. We talked about school. We've talked about, Gladwell. We talked about different influences. We talked about the challenges you faced. We talked about overcoming those challenges, being strong.
Short. I've been going around in circles saying the same thing. You see, and this came later. If you had asked me 5 years ago, what was I most proud of? I would have given you a different answer. Perhaps, that we were profitable, we were very profitable, blah, blah, blah. But guess what? There are many people who are profitable. You know the singular thing I'm most proud of? That IBTC was formed, was created, was built by a management team that they were all younger than me. So it is proof of what young Nigerians did or could do and can still do. So it was like getting young Nigerians to build a world-class institution. And today I see it, beginning to rear its head as well in some fintechs and so on, where you see that young Nigerians can come out and compete and become the best. So that's the thing I was most proud of. See, if luckily or unluckily, if 50-year-olds had come to work with me from the beginning, I wouldn't have been so proud. Yeah. But the fact that those who came to work with me were 20, 22, 24, that's the thing that gives me the greatest joy. Because it's really their success. What we did at the top was to provide the environment, provide the training, provide the motivation.
That is, I just want to say that, this is incredibly inspiring as I'm listening to you right now, and I think about the last hour of the conversation that we've been having. The thing that's really striking me, is your reference and your acknowledgement of the team and other people, right? There's a world in which we could have had this conversation and you could have just said, hey, me, and all these types of things. But actually, even this last comment you've just shared around me, I am most proud of an institution that people were able to be inspired, to work hard, to learn and to grow, and to be able to look forward, even without me being there. That is something that I just want to just raise up as something that's really, really important and is very profound to me as I hear that.
Okay, let me even add one more angle to it, which makes me proud. You see, and now I'll name some names. With the exception of Shola David Bora and Angela Modari, whom I knew from Now Merchant Bank, who followed me there. The other thing I'm most proud of is that all these other young people, most of them walked in off the streets. I didn't know them from anywhere. So which meant that all you did was that you were looking for the brightest and best people out there, young Nigerians. So whether it was Demola Shogunle, who is the group CEO today, whether it was Yinka Sani, who is the Church of Africa today, whether it was Yowande Sadiku, who rose to become an executive director, whether it was Obinaya Abajiwe, who rose to become an executive director. I'm talking about people that came in Obinaya at age 20, stayed in IBTC, worked and became an ED. So all those people, guess what? I didn't know them from anywhere. All I had was a system for picking out the best and the brightest and the best young Nigerians and creating an environment for them to thrive. Which is a different thing if you happen to have picked people who were all your cousins or you knew them from somewhere. These guys came in off the street on merits.
Yeah, that is
anywhere.
That is very powerful, right? Speaking to the idea of picking the right people, and the right people does not mean the people that you know, right? The right people mean, yeah, that's really.
In fact, let me assure you, if you limit yourself to those that you knew, what is the probability that you will get the best in Nigeria? I'm sorry for you at that point.
Yeah.
The only way to get the best. In fact, every day I go out and I meet people and they say, oh, you won't know me, sir. I said, what is the problem? They said, I wanted to work for IBTC. I came to IBTC. I did all the tests. I thought I did well. I did an interview and you guys didn't hire me. It broke my heart. People meet me every day, men and women, and tell me that they wanted to work for IBTC, but they were not selected. Now, I'm not saying that what we did was foolproof, but all I said was that there was an arrangement where you tried to pick the brightest and the best, those whom you thought could fit in and could help to grow the place. In that process, probably each time you had 15 applicants, you picked one. The other 14 went home disappointed. They're the ones that see you outside and say, sir, that day you guys turned me down, you broke my heart. I say, I'm very sorry.
Right. Yeah, but even that day you turned me down and broke my heart speaks to the desire for people to want to work in an institution that valued integrity. And the brand recognition was something that had been built to really make people want to go and work there and feel like they can thrive in that environment. So I think that is absolutely commendable. So last question, and I'm going to open it up to the questions for people in the chat. There's a couple of questions that are open up for us here. So the last question I have for you is, so as we think about looking forward, as we think about the next generation, as we think about the next group of people who want to be successful, who are striving for success, who are seeking success, what are any words for those folks? Any words for those folks as we think about?
Yes, right. but it would be like a summary of what we have been talking about. Please. But I just run through it. Number one, you've got to set the right goals. Like I said, in the Olympic Games, pick the right events. If you are scared of heights, don't go and attempt diving or pole vaults. Number two, define what success is or what success means to you. Define it carefully. Choose, because you have to know what exactly you're pursuing. Then number three, you've got to be able to plan to cope with all sorts of challenges as they come. What makes people succeed is not because they had brilliant ideas. What makes people succeed is because they overcame every challenge thrown at them. So you've got to be resilient. Then number four, like I said, also to keep yourself on track and the whole team on track, you must be able to measure what you're doing. Measurement is important. Then also, you have to have arrangements which are sustainable. It's no use having an arrangement that is only good for one time. You're talking about systems and people in an arrangement that is sustainable. And then also, very important, you have to invest in feedback mechanisms. Because without feedback, you're dead in whatever you're doing. I mean, internal feedback, external feedback. Then also, I've said the right human beings. Wrong human beings can destroy anything, any activity, there's any relationship. So the last one, and not the least, is that choose well, choose the right partners, choose the right people. Like I've just finished telling you how we turn down 14 people and you choose one person and you hope that you made the right choice. The other 14 will go home disappointed. But of course, listen, everybody talks as if people forget. People think that because they see those who stayed in IBTC, they forget that some people left, always left. Some people we hired could not make the grade, and we were bold enough to send them home.
Yeah.
Like a football team, if you don't perform, you're out.
Yeah. So making difficult decisions.
It's a merit-driven organization. So if you cannot meet the standards, and we try, we invest in you, we will do everything, and you still cannot meet it, then you're out. You're out because keeping you there beyond endlessly drags down the whole team.
Right. And so that ability to make those difficult decisions at those difficult times is also very, very important. Okay. So let's turn here to questions. So thank you so much, Mr. Peterside, for really sharing your story over the last hour. I've really, really appreciated and learnt from what you've shared today. And so I'm going to just go into some of the questions that we have. So again, if you have questions, please feel free to put them into the Q&A, and then we'll try and get to them as we see them. And so question here that I have is, you have left a legacy. And so in your later years, what was your method of mentorship?
The truth is that when you hire kids, you have to be a mentor to all. For people who worked in IBTC in the early days, they will tell you that there was a rule that come to work in the morning, do your work. After 5 o'clock in the evening, you were free to come and look for the CEO to discuss any problem that you had. Because you cannot just hire young people. Sometimes what is bogging them down is not the work itself, it's other problems they cannot handle. You won't believe it, but this time I won't mention names. Yeah, some wonderful young lady, a wonderful young guy. Do you know why the young girl won't perform? Because her boyfriend just left her. So you have to sit down with her at 5 o'clock or 5:30 and explain to her that boyfriend, whoever he is not the end of the world. Or the same. So the point I'm making is that if you hired young people like that, they came up to you and you gave them the invitation. They came up to you with all the problems that were distracting them from working well. And you had to be like almost like a sort of agony aunt and help them and guide them, counseling and all that. It's all part of the package. Right. Because you may think you were just a CEO, but to them, you were an elder brother, a father, and everything. So it was important that you also, in effect, I'm saying that you have to invest in people. And that includes helping to eliminate problems or things that are holding them back. Young people, there will be things disturbing them. Sometimes they will need them some form of counseling and so on. But again, I will never deceive you. Some people had to go. If somebody needs some counseling 24/7,
then that's a problem.
Then it's a problem.
Yeah.
It can't be forever.
Right. So like understand what the boundaries are, right?
Yes.
And understand what you need to communicate to someone to support them enough that they can actually get the job done. Yeah.
Or to say that, or if they're going to make it, then they will make it.
Yes.
If they make it, you can invest all your energy surrounding them and discussing with them and they will make it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So another question's coming in now. So we have, actually, I'll move that. I'll miss that one. So what led ANAP to starting the ANAP Jets business? What were the considerations?
That's an interesting one. You know, the truth is that, ANAP Business Jets, okay, let me go as far as saying that I was one of those people that I was never going to buy a private jet on my own. Even if I could afford one, I was never going to, because I felt and I knew I couldn't manage a private jet on my own. Managing a car is difficult enough. Managing an aircraft is a different ball game. So it became obvious to me that there were people like myself out there, who getting access to the plane was not the problem, but you wanted to make sure that those aircrafts were in a safe environment, the proper institution with all the controls, the systems in place and all that. Because safety in the air comes from all that. When you see airlines like Qantas, Singapore Airlines and all those people, Qantas, I think, has the best safety record in the world and all that. It is the systems also that protect. When a Qantas, pilot comes to work in the morning, even before he gets to the airport, there's a sign saying that his flight is postponed because of bad weather. He does not decide that, he can't decide that he still wants to fly. You follow me? There are rules. There are some weather conditions that if a pilot, which are not satisfactory, and the company has defined them, if a pilot even decides to go and land in those conditions and he lands successfully, after he's finished landing, he knows that he's lost his job. So you need that protection. So, right. So it was to have a proper disciplined aviation company, because safety comes from all those disciplines.
Right.
Again, it's people and systems. So I thought there was a vacuum in the market in that area.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that. And it's funny you raised Qantas, because that is one fact that I know because of watching Rain Man. I don't know if anyone will remember that film with Dustin Hoffman and Tom Cruise. In that film, Dustin Hoffman was talking about Qantas as the safest plane. So yeah, really, really interesting point there. So I'm gonna look through some other questions here. So to what extent did the inefficiencies in the Nigerian investment banking sector create the rich environment for great success?
Did you say the inefficiencies?
Yes. To what extent did the inefficiencies in the Nigerian investment banking sector create the rich environment for great success?
I think I would answer it a bit differently, and I have to choose my words carefully because I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. I said I worked for Nile Merchant Bank for 10 years, and I left to form IBTC. Nile Merchant Bank was still doing business. The oldest merchant banks in the country were there, but I think those banks were slightly handicapped because, guess what? Because the federal government of Nigeria was a shareholder in those banks. And with with due respects or just telling the truth, the government shareholding, government involvement in those banks brought in discipline. So within a short time, the private, 100% private merchant banks like IBTC, we were competing against the biggest players where the government had part ownership, and the government was interfering and destroying institutions. So it's almost like saying you are running efficiently against somebody, and he is handicapped because he's carrying the weight on his shoulder. Mm. So after a while, there's only one. Mm. So now, I don't know whether we would have been successful very quickly if we were competing in an industry where the strongest players were all private sector. So we were competing against, initially, the biggest players were governments, were banks with government interest, and the government was doing its damn best to destroy the institutions. So it's almost like saying you're doing 100 meters, and the government decides to tie the hands of their own athlete, and so you're running against somebody who is handicapped. So it's not really that the management teams were not good in those banks, but the ownership and the ownership influences and the interference handicapped them greatly. And we were just about efficiency, about merit, about right systems, right people, and all that.
Oh, great, thank you. Thank you for sharing that insight. So I'll move to another question here, slightly different tone here, right? So it's naming that, so you had a stint in the public sector through appointments, and if fact check this, if this is in fact right or wrong, and what was your experience with this, and was it hard to replicate the value-based IBTC model in the public sector?
Well, I never held a full-time public sector activity, but I've been involved in many activities involving in the economic team. I was in the economic team under President Yar'Adua. I was in the economic management team under President Goodluck Jonathan. Then I was on the National Council on Privatization. There was a technical committee in the National Council, which I was chairman of. And I think that's the best example to give. That's that committee where I was the chairman that handled what I was in charge of advising the National Council. I use that example because when I was in IBTC, I had a great say in choosing the team. When it was a government assignment, the government chose me, but I didn't choose the other members of the committee. Mm. So, but I was the chairman. Mm. So, but it gave me a broad-based team, people from all over Nigeria, different walks of life. But the one thing I will tell you is that within a short time, we were working together as one unit, one cohesive unit. It's about leadership. It's about knowing how to manage people. It's about being honest and sincere with people and creating an environment where people know that we are here for serious business. So for me, that was a very good experience, because if one was in doubt, or if one thought that, oh, you can only work with people that you chose, it's not true at all. The vice chairman of that committee was somebody called Harun Asambo. I think the first time I met him was when we came for inauguration. But guess what? At the end of the assignment, we were like Siamese twins. Mm. Because every activity I do, I carry the deputies along. Mm. About building confidence. When people see that you're straight with them, that every information you give, you've checked it is accurate, and everybody begins to understand that we are in the business of doing the correct thing, bringing the right information. So we work together as a cohesive team, And so the same rules apply, and that's why when people write like books like Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, really, it doesn't matter which activity you're involved in, those habits are relevant. Mm. Even in your marriage, they're relevant. Right. They're relevant in a government assignment. They're relevant in a private company. I mean, some of those habits are what? Think win-win. Do you really want to think win-lose? Or first things first? Do you want to put last things first? So when you have a committee like that and people realize, the point I'm making is that you are living by those same rules.
Right. So the things that have brought success in the private sector, think about how do we bring them in? And again, the right people, the right teams. And I think this thing about communication, right? And actually bringing people along is something that's really, really...
Also, you've got to build trust. Mm. You see, trust is something that has to be earned. You cannot pluck trust from a tree. People are only going to trust you as their chairman when they find that you are straight in all your dealings with them. Everything you tell them is true. You don't play games with them.
And again, that goes back to that theme of integrity, right? How do we build trust, right? Through actually having those right values. So I really appreciate that, that part. So I'll move to another question. Maybe this will be the last question that we take. 2:25 now. I want to be respectful of our time. I know that we have 90 minutes, so we have 5 minutes left. And the last question I'll ask, and maybe this is more of a general question here, but it is, what would you say your biggest mistake was? I think folks are still trying to learn, right? What would you say your biggest mistake was in business? And how did you turn it around?
That's a difficult one. I think the biggest mistake, when we did a merger and we acquired two retail banks, IBTC, I think somewhere along the line, I underestimated what it would take in terms of integration, pulling together strange bedfellows and all that, partly because you didn't have time. You see, with IBTC, I had time to build it, year after year. Here, you brought in many new people. So it was like a crash course. Also, we knew the bank, after bringing all those people in, the bank would be overstaffed. So you had to let go of some people. So we did all that. But I think if we had to do it all over again, one of those two banks that we acquired, I would never have acquired them, because the only thing they brought really to the table, which we knew at the time, but probably we didn't know how bad it was a bit of a dodgy balance sheet. They did not have the same quality of people. So you have to manage all that, So if one had to do it again, we would have taken only one of those banks and left the other one. I said, no way. But again, I come back to not crying over spilled milk, because once you've acquired somebody, you've acquired them. So you better solve the problem. You follow me? You just have to solve the problem, So it was sad, but we had to let some people go because we were not sure they could make the grade. Some of them will dispute it and say, no, what do you mean? You guys were unfair, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but it's true. But there's a particular, standard we're trying to set. And so one should not compromise.
Well, Mr. Peterside, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for the time that you've spent talking to me today. Thank you for sharing all these nuggets of wisdom, right? Thank you for sharing your personal story, those lessons learned, those challenges, right? The earlier story. Thank you for sharing that as well. On behalf of the Boys to Men Foundation, just really, really appreciative of the time that you've given us. And again, want to be respectful of the fact that we have 90 minutes. We have 2 minutes left. So thank you again. And I think that's all that we have for today. So if you have any closing words, you're welcome to share them.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, my only closing word is that it kept on echoing throughout everything we were saying. When I kept saying that, listen, remember that we were dealing with a young management team, and that you could take young people and get them to perform and deliver to the highest standard. It's encouraging for our country, because all too often, many people try and deride. Even when I started IBTC, people used to say things like, what are you doing with all those kids? And that Nigerian kids are useless. They can't do anything. They can't do anything. So I was happy that those so-called useless kids turned around and delivered, quality. So that shows you that it's not about the kids. It's about the leadership.
Yeah, that is powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that. I really, really appreciate that. It's actually reminding me of something that someone said. I believe it might have been Alan Hansen on Match of the Day, maybe 20 years ago. He said, you can't win anything to kids. And he was talking, you can't win anything with kids. He was talking about Man United. And we won the league that year. We won
It
the
won
league that year. Yeah, that's right.
Be very careful to run down cheats.
Yeah, that is amazing. All right. Thank you so much, sir. Appreciate you. Appreciate your time.
Yeah. Bless you.